Okay, we just got done seeing Exodus, Gods and Kings, starring Christian Bale, directed by Ridley Scott. It is Ridley Scott's adaptation to the story of Exodus. And when I first heard about this movie, I was pretty excited. And then I read a little bit more into it. And when I kind of read about some of the details about the film, what its direction was going to be, I got a little bit on the fence. And then I saw the reviews come in, and at first they were very mixed, which didn't surprise me. And then today, before going to go see it, you told me that they were actually getting really bad reviews now.
It went from mixed to just bad.
Yeah. So, I'm gonna, we're gonna try to give this the most, honest review.
Unbiased.
Unbiased review, yeah. I mean, we are going to compare this to its source material. We're going to compare it to how it's told in the Bible. And I'm also going to go ahead and compare it to The Prince of Egypt, because that was the last big mainstream adaptation I can think of the Exodus story. And The Prince of Egypt, I think, is actually one of the best adaptations of the story of Moses, honestly.
Get that Charlton Heston.
It's a, of course, but I mean, even though The Prince of Egypt is a DreamWorks family, musical, it still does an excellent job adapting the story, I think. And it's also just a really good movie. So, this movie, we'll go into the details in a moment, but to kind of just summarize the film real quick, I don't think it's a terrible movie. The movie is clearly ambitious, and you can tell this is a very personal project for Ridley. It's clear. I mean, enough of that's evident at the very end, because when the credits roll up, it flat out says, "For my brother Tony Scott." This was dedicated to his late brother. And if you don't know Tony Scott, he was also a famous director, and he killed himself a couple of years ago. So this is clearly a very personal project for Ridley. And I am a Ridley Scott fan. I love, and actually I'm also a Tony Scott fan. I actually like both of their work quite a bit. And so I was actually really excited for this. I think it's clearly ambitious. There's a lot of good qualities about this film. There's, beautiful visuals, a lot of good acting. Christian Bale, I think, did a really good job in the lead. Some well-shot action scenes, really good music, and good ideas. The film, just at the end of it all, I think the film is just a little too rushed. For such an epic, large-scale story like the story of the Exodus, this movie does not spend much time... This movie does not spend much time focusing on some of the more important and critical moments of that story, and they just kind of breeze by. And because of that, a lot of the heavier moments of that story kind of come off underwhelming, and there's just a lacking of emotion from it, so it's a little bit hard to get invested. So it's kind of rushed, it's not very well paced, and also because of the changes that are made for this film, it kind of fails, I think, on both sides. I think it ultimately fails as a biblical portrayal, but I think it also does fail as a secular portrayal because, again, it's so rushed. And
I feel like he tried to make it the best of both worlds,
yes,
but then ended up not making it on either side.
Exactly. I think you are 100% right. I think, and again, I think it's not a bad idea by any means. And again, it's not a terrible movie because there's a lot of good qualities to it. But I think he was trying to do a little bit of both. And I think because of that, it just falls short on both sides. So ultimately, I think the movie does kind of fail. But I don't think it fails miserably.
Let's just, I mean, it was not a very good movie, but I was no means not enjoying it. I was enjoying it very much. I mean,
I wasn't bored.
It wasn't hard to sit through.
No, it wasn't. I mean, it was like a 2.5 hour film, and even though you can feel it being a long film, it didn't drag on.
Mm-mm.
Like it went. I mean, then again, it moves so quickly,
Yes.
Which again hurts the film a lot. But it's not a boring film by any means, and there's a lot of intense moments which we'll get to. So that's kind of just in a nutshell. For those who don't want to see us talk about this film forever, that's kind of we're both pretty mutual on it. It just, good ideas, good ambition, but just kind of falls short. I can't recommend it. I don't think I can. I'd say,
if you're a Ridley Scott fan,
I don't know though. I don't know if I can recommend it. I guess
if you're a fan of like epic movies, I mean, if you like really cool CGI and...
I guess, but again, I feel as an epic it falls short though, because it doesn't feel like an epic. It's taking an epic story, but it's making it feel underwhelming. I guess I'll say this. If you are interested in seeing the Exodus story told in a different way, with a different mindset, it's worth checking out. I'll say that. It's worth checking out.
One thing, though, going into the movie, if you're going to watch it, Christian Bale does a very good job in the lead role. But him, being the actor that they chose for that role, it's very distracting. Because he is so clearly white, and everyone around him is so clearly not white, that it is very distracting.
It's odd. It's odd that they didn't really choose anyone else as Caucasian as him for all the roles. Everyone else, for the most part, kind of looks the roles, except Christian Bale as Moses. So it is a little odd, but whatever.
But I think his acting makes up.
I think he gives a solid performance. It's Christian Bale doing what he does best. So, so going into this, the movie does not start out with the story of Moses as a baby being put on a basket and the basket going into the river. It actually cuts to Moses being an adult and being in Egypt and being with the royal family. And kind of like Prince of Egypt, this movie has a heavy amount of focus on the relationship between him and his brother, Ramses, except in Prince of Egypt, because, to sidetrack real quick, the Bible doesn't really go into any detail about the relationship between Ramses and Moses. In fact, it almost goes into none of it at all. And so there's not much told from that. So kind of from a movie standpoint, the good thing about that is that you can kind of do whatever you want with that, So in Prince of Egypt, they had Moses and Ramses be very close brothers who love each other, and that's why when Moses comes back to free the Hebrews, it's so conflicting between him and Ramses. This movie, however, does something different in the sense that this movie does focus on the relationship quite a bit between Moses and Ramses. However, in this case, there's more bitterness between them. There's more jealousy, like
competition.
The Pharaoh, their father, the Pharaoh, you could tell that he favors Moses more, and Ramses sees that, and he's clearly unhappy about it.
But in this movie, they're not brothers. In this movie,
they're cousins, aren't they?
Cousins.
That was weird.
Because in this movie, Ramses' mother, the one who is Moses' mother in the actual story, despises Moses.
Yeah, she hates Moses.
She wants him dead.
She wants him. Yeah.
Her sister is the one that found him.
That was a weird change. I thought that was an odd change. I felt it was kind of an unnecessary change. But unless now, real quick, it's been a while since I've read Exodus. I thought in the story of Exodus they are brothers, or at least half brothers or something. If I'm wrong, I apologize. It's been a while since I've read it.
Well,
but
in the Prince of Egypt, they're brothers.
Yeah, I know. Mm-hmm. But I mean, not even the Prince of Egypt is the most accurate adaptation. But anyways, they focus on the relationship.
They're very close.
Yeah, they focus on the relationship between Ramses and Moses. But in this adaptation, there's a bit more bitterness and resentment and Moses is kind of looked up much higher than Ramses is.
Because doesn't the Pharaoh flat out say at one point that he just thinks Moses is a better leader?
Yes, he goes and he says, "I would rather you lead Egypt when I die than Ramses." So Moses goes to basically, without getting too much into it, one of the other big differences is how Moses figures out that he is in fact a Hebrew. And then one of the bigger inaccuracies is when he murders an Egyptian soldier. So in the original story of the Exodus, Moses sees an Egyptian soldier brutally abusing a Hebrew slave, like in an alley or something. And Moses sees this and he takes pity on him. So he saves the slave and beats the soldier to death. And then word gets broken out, Moses killed an Egyptian soldier, and so then he runs. Because when the Pharaoh heard about this, he got so angry at Moses. So in this movie, what they did differently was he ends up going to this spy meeting that are being held by the Hebrews, because the Hebrews hear that Moses is there, and they're like, we want to talk to Moses. So they sit down with Moses and they say they basically tell him you are a Hebrew. And then that's when they explain the whole story about how when he was a baby, they were slaughtering children at the time, and so his mother put him on a basket and put the basket into a river, and the river happened to end up at the Pharaoh's home, and the Pharaoh's wife took pity on Moses as a baby and adopted Moses. So that's how in this movie he finds out. And it's weird how the murder, because almost immediately after this scene is when Moses murders an Egyptian soldier, and it's so random.
He walks out into the alley and they're and he has his hood up, and so the soldiers are like, "Hey, slave," and they hit him, and he just turns around and just brutally murders them and just walks away.
It made very little sense. Yeah,
it was out of nowhere. It was oh my gosh.
At first, needless to say, Moses denies what he's hearing. He's like, I am not a Hebrew. I am not a slave. I'm not one of you. So he storms out angry, and then these two girls are like, "Hey you," and then he just turns around and stabs them both, killing one of them, wounding the other. And it was like, dude, they would know who you are if you took off your hood and just said, "Hey, leave me alone." And they would totally leave him alone. So it just made no sense for him to kill them. But he kills them, and the guard who survives basically realizes that he was with a bunch of Hebrew spies, and so then they tell Ramses, and by this point...
No, it was the corrupt official.
Yeah, but they tell the corrupt official, then the corrupt official tells Ramses.
No, it was the Hebrew slaves that told him, remember?
Oh, okay, yeah, you're right.
Because then they're like, what reward do we get for this? And he's like, you can keep your lives.
Yeah, that's right. Well, so anyways, Ramses find out what happened, and Ramses starts to realize that Moses is in fact actually not born from his family.
The whole scene where he calls, after he finds out, and he calls Moses into his chamber, and the whole scene with him and all the women, that was a weird, structured scene.
I actually liked that scene a lot, and I'll explain why. So by this point, Ramses' father has died, and Ramses is now the Pharaoh of Egypt. Ramses finds out that Moses killed one of his soldiers, and then he starts to hear these things about how Moses is in fact born a Hebrew. So there's a scene where Ramses basically calls Moses forward, tells him, "So, these people say that you attacked these two soldiers and that you were with these Hebrew spies. What do you think of that?" And so Moses denies it. So then...
And Ramses kind of laughs it off.
And Ramses' mom comes in, Moses' mom comes in, and then Moses' sister comes in.
A sister, they don't know it's his sister at that point.
And basically Ramses takes Moses' sister, and he's like, put your arm on the table. And he takes out the sword, and he's basically forcing them to admit that Moses is in fact adopted. And I actually like that scene a lot because I thought it... Because you know the moment that Ramses calls Moses forward, you know Ramses knows everything. Like, he knows this. He just wants to hear Moses confess it. And I thought it was actually a really well built-up scene. And when he asks the sister to, put your arm on the table, like, you knew what he was going to do. I thought it was actually really intense. For a movie, because by this point we were like maybe 20 minutes into the film, for a movie that was feeling very underwhelming because there wasn't much emotion going on, there wasn't much detail, and there wasn't much moments. There weren't many times where they were actually having a moment with the scene. They were just going by. I actually thought this was a really intense and well done scene. So Moses admits, yes, I am Hebrew. And so Ramses decides to, instead of killing him, to put him into exile him from Egypt. And
which makes the mom mad because she just wants him.
Yeah, she just wants him dead. So, this goes back to the issue with the lack of emotion. That scene, the reveal scene that I thought was really intense, is almost completely just botched because as soon as that scene is over, it cuts to Moses being in jail, followed by him getting kicked out of Egypt, and he's showing, like, no emotion. Like, Christian Bale is just, like, he almost...
Whatever.
He acts like it's not a big deal.
Yeah, he's just like, okay, whatever.
Like, he's saying goodbye to his mom and his sister, his adopted mom and sister, basically forever, assuming that he's going to get killed out in the desert, I might add, and he's just like... Can I say goodbye to my mom? Like, he's showing
like, when he goes to his sister, he's like,
yeah.
And then, like, walks off.
He hugs his mom, and then, I can't remember his sister's name. He says her name, just says it, and then just walks away. He doesn't even, like, hug his sister. It was such an emotionless and empty scene.
Yeah.
It was nothing. Like, again, to go to Prince of Egypt, in Prince of Egypt, when Moses kills the soldier and he flees out of Egypt, he doesn't get kicked out, he runs out of Egypt, they're playing dramatic music, he's struggling and he's like dying, he has nothing with him, he's just out in the desert, and he has all this gold jewelry on him because he's like a high power in Egypt, and you see him just slowly just ripping all of it off, and for an animated film, I remember seeing that as a kid in the theater and feeling the emotion. Because it's like, you can just see him just, everything that he has lived for all his life, he realizes is a lie. And he's just ripping it all off of him now. And it's very emotional. This movie doesn't do anything like that. He just leaves Egypt.
And then once he leaves, you just see a montage of him walking through the desert.
And then he gets very briefly attacked by two guys, and he kills them very quickly.
Which it doesn't really explain very well, like, who they are or why they're there.
They go back to it later that maybe Ramses sent those two guys to kill him.
No,
but then Ramses says, no, my mom sent them to kill you. I helped you by giving you your sword. So, who knows? Moses doesn't even seem to care about being exiled. And he gets into an action scene with these two guys that try to kill him. And that made me think, during that action scene and the previous action scenes, a compliment I can give to this film, despite the PG-13 rating, it is a pretty brutal film, especially when they get to the plague scenes. Like, it's actually kind of a bloody film too. It doesn't shy away from it at all. So that's a good thing I can say about it. So Moses goes into the small village where he meets his soon-to-be wife, and this movie spends no time at all with him getting to know who will become his wife. He meets her, talks to her, looks at her, and then marries her.
This scene is like under a minute. I mean,
this all happens.
Boom, boom, boom. They're
this
married.
all happens within a matter of like 2 minutes.
Whoa.
It just happens.
And then we
get
the greatest line.
And then we get the best line of the film, where they get married, and we cut to their wedding night, and they're both like holding each other. They're basically saying how much they love each other and how he's going to look after her. And then she says, proceed. I have never heard that be the phrase for a couple to begin, so to speak. I've never, ever, ever heard it. Proceed.
She's like, proceed, and then he undoes her top, and then it like cuts away.
Cuts away.
Like,
PG-13. And so,
okay.
yeah,
right.
Proceed. I thought that was an interesting sex line.
No, because then right after that, doesn't it immediately go to 9 years later?
Again, fast pace. She says, proceed. He starts to take off her clothes, fade out, and then it literally says, 9 years later, and cuts to Egypt. 9 years later!
There's some interesting transitions in this movie.
There is no subtlety in its transitions.
Yeah.
They just happen. And so we cut to 9 years later, and, you know, they're building this huge statue of the Pharaoh, and Ramses is being Ramses. He has his firstborn. If you know the story of Exodus, you know that doesn't work out well for him, but he has his firstborn. We spent some time with that.
Moses has his firstborn too.
Moses has his firstborn too. Now, I do like this. Through the very brief time we see with Moses and his family, they establish that his wife has very strong faith in God, and so does pretty much everyone in that village, which they do that in the Prince of Egypt too.
Yeah. Except for Moses.
But Moses, 9 years being married to her, he still has no faith in God. He doesn't believe that there is, at least he doesn't believe that there is one superior God. And I kind of liked that. I liked that though. It felt human. Which is what this movie is really trying to do, is feel like to make it feel as plausible as possible.
To make you feel like it could be you.
Yes, to make it feel relatable despite it happening so long ago. So, then we cut.
Now we get to your favorite part of the movie.
I honestly think after this comes the worst scene in the film, and it's the burning bush scene. Now, I know it's really hard to take that scene from the Bible and adapt it in a contemporary way and make it seem serious, not make it seem silly in any way, and make it not seem dated, I guess. Not even silly, but not make it seem dated. I know that's really hard because it's a burning bush talking to Moses and it's God. Like I get why that'd be really hard to put on film today, especially. I did not like how they chose to do this. So Moses falls off this mountain and gets buried in rocks, and he's all beaten up and bruised up.
And there's this bush, and
he wakes up to the bush being on fire. He wakes up to the burning bush. It's right there. Again, no subtlety in the transition. He just wakes up and it's right there.
But it's not even like in most stories it's in like a cave or something. Mm-hmm. It's just out in the open. I mean, he's just buried on the side of this mountain, and there's just this bush right next to him, and just boom.
So then we cut to who plays God in this movie, and it's a little boy. They have this little boy with a thick accent, giving no emotion at all, except anger, play God. And he's next to the bush. That's the thing. The bush itself is not talking to Moses. It's a boy next to the bush, and the boy is God. And because Moses flat out says, like, who are you? He says, I am. You know, so yeah, the boy is God in this film. Now, and he basically... The whole bush scene is trimmed down to a matter of like 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's not very long.
They take almost the entire conversation from the Bible out. And basically it's just, it's time that you go back to your homeland and do what you know needs to be done. Free the people. And that's it. That's the whole scene.
And then
it cuts to him waking up in a bed.
Yeah, okay, and then it shows him sinking into the mud. Yeah. Like the mud covering him, and then boom, transition, he's in a bed.
So in other words, we don't have God saying, flat out saying, I need you to go to Egypt and you are gonna free my people, and Moses saying, no, I can't do it. You know, what if they don't believe me? Well, I'm going to give you things to prove it. I'm going to make your staff turn into a snake. I'm going to give you leprosy, then heal you. I'm going to do all these things. And Moses keeps doubting. All that is not in there.
It's also kind of like, you know, he gets buried and he meets this boy, and the boy tells him he needs to go back, and then it cuts to the scene, and then he just kind of accepts it. He's just kind of like, okay, I'm leaving now.
And that's the thing, is that there's
weird.
It's very weird because, like I said, if we're going biblically here, Moses totally did not want to do it. He kept arguing with God. Like, God's like, I'm going to protect you, but he's just like, what if they don't believe me? What if they mock me? What if they hurt me? What if they kill me? What if they threaten me? And he just keeps arguing with God.
And this scene, it's just like, okay, and I'm going to leave, I'm going to go.
Now, here's the thing, and this goes on for the rest of the film, where basically Moses is not portrayed, and again, to go with like the more human, secular kind of theme of the film, Moses is no longer portrayed, unlike other adaptations, he's not portrayed as a man who has this epiphany, and basically, despite his fears, he's going to do what God says, and they happen. In this case, they portray him more as a man who is pretty sure God is telling him to do these things, and so he's doing them, but he's not even totally sure, and he looks like a psychopath the whole time he's doing it.
Yes.
Now, at first, I wasn't for this, but the movie, I actually thought the movie did it well, because that's probably what it really happened. If we were to look at the true story of the Exodus, I mean, whether you believe in it or not, I mean, even if...
just imagine how people... I mean, if we go back and look at it, how normal people would have reacted to him
absolutely
being like, hey, God just told me that I have to go back to Egypt and free all the Hebrews. You'd be like...
And how did he tell you?
Dude,
well, a burning bush told me.
Are you feeling okay?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, no, it's absolutely true.
Well, and of course, in this movie, when he's leaving, his wife is like...
ticked off.
What is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like, what? Why are you doing this?
So the idea is that the burning bush itself is portrayed more like a symbolic image, and that whole scene is kind of like a psychological scene. Now, here's the thing. I'm not against that. I'm not against the idea of the burning bush concept being more in Moses' head than it is physically happening. I actually think that's actually a really interesting idea. I just don't think they quite did it right. And also having God being portrayed by this boy,
I didn't like
that either. I guess the idea being that it's like being portrayed by like a child who is innocent and pure, I guess. But it doesn't work, especially since a big part of the Exodus is showing God's wrath on sinful people.
And you're watching this little kid like basically blowing up about
yelling about how people are going to be on their knees and beg him for mercy and stuff after he has his wrath.
When he has that breakdown where he gets mad and he's telling Moses about what all these things he's gonna do, it was weird coming from a child.
Yes. Which is why I didn't like the idea of having God be portrayed by a human. And if you're wondering, no, I don't think the boy is supposed to be Jesus.
Because I mean, because in the Prince of Egypt, it's always like something like when the burning bush scene, it's the bush talking.
Yes.
Or like whenever else he's talking to him, it's like beams of light and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like I understand they wanted to do something different, and again, I understand that they wanted to have a more human, psychological, mental kind of approach, and I am 100% for that because I think it's actually a really interesting concept. I just think they kind of missed the mark on it. And so when that scene happened, and we were both kind of laughing, we're like, that was so not well done.
No.
Again, easily the worst scene in the film. My first thought was, dude, it's only going to be downhill from here. Surprisingly,
not.
The movie gets much better after this.
That was the down point. It just goes.
The first half of the movie as a whole is rushed, but the first half is noticeably rushed. The burning bush scene is not good. Moses returning to Egypt and then the rest of the story is, for the most part, in my opinion, really well done.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it doesn't make up for the rest of the movie, for everything that happened before that. But the whole, basically the second half of the movie, I think is actually really well done with him going back to Egypt. So he goes back to Egypt, and so
I mean, that doesn't mean that it's perfect though. Like the
no,
rest of
there's
it,
still
it
some
goes up, but there's still some
there's
weird
still
things
issues. There's a weird scene where Moses, the first thing he does when he comes back to Egypt is literally face to face confront Ramses by putting a sword up to his neck, and Christian Bale is talking borderline like Batman, trying to intimidate him. It was a weird scene.
In that scene.
He looks like a crazy man.
And apparently, in this movie, there was absolutely no guards in ancient Egypt.
Yeah, just go in the temple.
In the scene, he's like standing in the middle of the stables, and Moses just kind of comes out of the shadows, and is just sitting there with the sword to his neck. And while he's doing that, Hebrews around him are taking the horses and stuff, and there's no one else there.
Yeah,
it was.
Yep. Yeah, it's not a perfect second half, but there's still flaws with it. Yeah, but so yeah, he basically tells Ramses, like, I'm coming back to free the Hebrews. God has told me to do this. He gives him an
ultimatum. He's like, free them or
there will be consequences.
Bad stuff is going to happen.
My God is going to do things to bad things.
And of course, Ramses doesn't.
And so Ramses basically is like, I want Moses dead. And that was a weird moment when he says, "I want Moses dead." He's like,
"I want Moses."
He's like, "I want Moses dead." He did this. He's like, "Dead." It was a weird.
No. He's like, "I want Moses dead." Now go. And they like start to leave, and then he's like, "Oh, by the way, his family too."
Yeah, his family too. It was okay. We should talk about it. The guy that plays Ramses. I couldn't tell if he was doing a really good job or a really bad job, because there were a lot of moments where he was reading lines in a really awkward way, but sometimes I was like, I think he's intentionally doing it for the sake of the character.
Like there were some times where he said, like, he was in a scene and it was kind of like, ugh, but then there were some times where he was in a scene where it was like, wow, that was actually really good.
Well, exactly. It was weird.
Bipolar.
Yeah. So, we cut to the plague scenes. The plague scenes are brutal and really well filmed, and they are pretty shocking. Between...
The plague scenes, in my opinion, were done very well, except for the blood.
What starts it? So,
I didn't like how they did the blood river scene.
So, again, this movie tries to have kind of a natural explanation approach to it. So they actually go into a lot of detail of how it would have been physically possible for all the plagues to happen, besides just God just snapping his fingers and them happening. So the explanation is that a bunch of something like clay or something. Something happened that made all these crocodiles.
that was the guy trying to explain why it happened.
Sure. Well,
but I think in this that God is making the crocodile.
Well, yes, he is. I do believe he is. But basically, all these crocodiles. What starts is the blood river, the river of blood, which is contaminating all the water as well as killing all the fish. And the explanation is that all these crocodiles or alligators, whatever.
They're crocodiles.
Okay. All these crocodiles basically just attack all these Egyptians that are on boats and just brutally kill them.
And each other.
And the crocodiles are also eating each other. And it's just this brutal scene with CGI crocodiles. And it very quickly contaminates the entire Egyptian, sea.
Yeah.
Within a matter of no time.
The Nile. The entire Nile.
And you see all these fish, these dead fish come up. And then we get to the frogs coming out. And then we get to all the flies, and then we
Locusts.
get that was brutal.
Locusts, and then hail.
Then the hail.
I thought it was interesting how they went with hail instead of fire.
I thought I guess again that was to be more realistic, so to speak.
Because hail is something that actually happens.
Yeah, it happens every day. Well, not every day, but it's an occurrence for us. Not so much firestorms, but I actually thought it would have been really cool if it was a firestorm.
Yeah.
With a big budget, Ridley Scott directing it. I wanted a firestorm over Egypt. but besides that, the plague scenes I thought were actually really well done. And I actually, and the final thing, God's kind of final, like, this is the last straw, was those who do not obey this request I send, I'm going to kill their firstborn child at night.
I thought it was firstborn son.
Yes, firstborns. I'm going to kill their firstborn sons will be taken away. This section of the movie had a lot of emphasis, and I actually like that. Because I thought they did not focus on that enough in Prince of Egypt, and as a kid, that terrified me. I was like, they focused very little on that in Prince of Egypt.
The firstborn son scene was very good. I liked that.
Yes, and I like how Moses...
It was intimidating.
Moses...
It was creepy.
Yeah. Moses basically is like, he's not arguing, but he hears God tell him what he's going to do, and Moses he's like, no, please no, like, don't do this.
As a side note, really quick, before we go back to that, so Moses, while all these plagues are happening, he keeps going up to this ridge away from the Hebrews to talk to God, but this dude from the camp keeps following him.
It's Aaron.
His brother Aaron keeps following him, and so this dude keeps watching him, but he can't see God. But Moses can. So you always see these scenes of him watching Moses argue with himself.
Just yell at himself, like, what do you want from me? Like, I thought that was kind of like a psychopath. So the firstborn scene happens, and very emotional scene. I'd say it's the most emotional scene in the whole film.
It's a good thing those guys in front of us were laughing.
Yeah, oh my gosh. We had a few obnoxious people in the theater with us. So, in the story, that's the last straw, and the Pharaoh finally says, get out of my kingdom, take your people with you, just get away from us, because we are tired of this. And so they do. And then, like in the story of Exodus, after a few days go by, Ramses thinks it over and says, you know what? I want them all dead for what happened. So then he goes after Moses. And so, hang on real quick, I'm just gonna... Okay, so we then get to them chasing Moses and the people, and all the Hebrews, as they're just trying to get away from it all. And so you know where this is going. This is getting to the river scene, probably the most famous part of the story of the Exodus. And, well, it's the climax, kind of, at least of the story of that. And I thought they kind of give this explanation as to why the river is like, it basically said there's a current or something.
Instead of in this movie, kind of keeping with the things where it's kind of tries to make it more like human.
Yes, yeah.
In this movie, he doesn't go like this, and
he doesn't just walk up to the river and do this.
It kind of happens on
overnight.
Its own,
yeah. They just kind of
separate. They're watching in the water, just kind of by itself, just kind of currents away.
Yeah.
And
because by this point, Moses kind of gives up because he's kind of lost in where they're going, and he knows that Ramses and his men are going after them, and they're getting close, and they just see this river, and he just says God, I don't know what to do anymore. I failed. And then the next day, slowly the river starts to separate. And I actually kind of like this speech he kind of gives to the crowd, because then he's like, everyone, we need to cross this river. And they're all like, no, you're crazy. You are freaking crazy. And then he kind of gives this speech about how, I asked you to trust me, you did, and I got you out of there. And it wasn't me, though, that got you out of there. It was God. And I have realized that now. I now realize that it is God that has been doing this. And I'm asking you, please, to do what God says and follow me through this river. And I just thought it was a really well done scene, actually.
Yeah. And in this movie, in most adaptions, kind of like The Prince of Egypt, when he separates the Red Sea, it's just a tiny bit. In this movie, it's miles.
Well, but that makes sense, though, considering it's thousands of people crossing, So, the scene where they do cross the river, and then Ramses and the Egyptians are starting to cross, and the water starts to come back, I thought that was actually a very intense scene.
It was. The special effects of the water coming was very
it was very good. Yeah, for a movie that's
like it feels like you can feel like the water approaching.
Yes.
I mean, it's like.
Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, every Egyptian gets killed except Ramsey, and Ramsey's basically left with nothing. So he's going to die because he's out in the desert now.
That was kind of. I mean, I understand the point of it because they want to show Ramsey's being lost.
Despair.
But it's like he was like in the middle.
Literally
of
in the
middle.
Sea. Although
all this water gets on top of him, and somehow
he
survives.
They do the exact same thing in Prince of Egypt, though.
I don't know.
From what I recall, in Prince of Egypt, after Moses and all of them leave the river, it cuts to like later on, and you see Ramses like he's actually like in the middle of like the water, and he's like shouting Moses' name over and over again, and then it goes back to Moses. And everyone else being happy. So I mean, after that we get he reunites with his family, and we get some really awkward editing with him reuniting with his wife. She says proceed again so they can have sex again after who knows how long he's been gone. And then we get like a very, very brief, again, because this movie is so rushed. The last
a very, very brief commandment.
The last 2 minutes essentially shows us the rest of the book of Exodus, where he makes the 10 Commandments and then he travels to, with everyone. And you see Moses being older and he's kind of happy, and the end. So,
there you go.
I mean, like I said, the movie...
Well, if you want to hear the story of Exodus...
There you have
it.
This movie kept reminding me of Dwayne Johnson's Hercules. Although I would much rather watch Hercules again than watch this. Yeah. It's shorter too, but it's a much more fun film.
I'm not coming away from it mad that I'm glad I saw it.
Honestly,
it's kind of like a one watch thing.
I could see myself watching it again. But it's definitely not a film that I'm going to go out of my way to see again. Yeah. It's not a film that I'm like, you got to see this. But honestly...
I think it's better, a lot better than the critics are giving
it credit for. It's not that
bad. It's also not amazing.
Again, it has a lot of good ideas. It has ambition. It just falls short in the end. And that's a shame. I really hope that doesn't... I hope that doesn't not to sound like a pansy, but considering how personal this movie was for Ridley, and considering that this film was dedicated to his dead brother, I hope that
it's going to be a success.
Financially, yes, but I hope the harsh, negative reviews. I mean, we're not getting a good review. I hope that doesn't really bring him down. I hope that doesn't discourage him as a movie that's tributed to his passed away brother. I love you, Ridley Scott. It makes I hope you keep making movies, but at the end of the day, it's much better that this movie kind of falls just a little short, as opposed to it being an insultingly bad portrayal of the Exodus.
The way that this movie was portrayed, taking a biblical story and kind of making it more human, wasn't that the same? I never saw it, but wasn't that kind of the same thing the Noah movie did?
I actually didn't see Noah either, but from what I have heard, it's kind of similar, because the story of Noah doesn't have much detail in the book of Genesis, so they took a lot of liberties, and I think from what I heard from other people who did see it, a lot of their source material were other documents that tell the story of Noah, but not from the biblical perspective. So there are differences on it, which got backlash from a lot of Christians. And that, I want to say that out. From a Christian standpoint, I did not find this movie offensive.
No.
I mean, again, I didn't really like the whole burning bush thing, but
that wasn't just from a Christian. It was just a weird.
Yeah, it wasn't a good scene. Yeah, granted, I am a pretty laid back guy, but I don't. I mean,
I can see
I can see
a lot of people getting offended by this.
I can see hardcore people like getting really offended by this. This is totally not the movie to like boycott. This is not the movie for Christian like conservative groups to be like protesting over. Not at all.
No, that's the interview.
Yeah. Yeah. This is not, putting it simply, this is not like The Last Temptation of Christ. It's nothing like that.
What's that?
It was this infamous film that Martin Scorsese made in the 80s about the Passion of Christ. Willem Dafoe plays Jesus. But it's a very, it's a very offensive portrayal. I'll tell you more about it later. But anyways,
we could talk trailers really quick.
Sure, we can talk. So anyways, that's Exodus. I'm gonna give it a C minus. I'm not gonna give it a D. I'm gonna give it a C minus because there's still a lot of good.
It was just kind of in the middle. You know?
Yeah, I'd say it's being really polite. It's okay.
Yeah.
So that's Exodus, Gods and Kings. So trailers. We got a trailer for the sequel to Divergent, which we didn't see. I'm guessing they made those movies back to back.
Because it's really quick.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that movie came out earlier this year, didn't it? Yeah. Jeez.
So I'm guessing they made those back to back. So we got a trailer for that. We got a trailer for Moby Dick, which looks really intense. And Ron Howard.
It's not called Moby Dick, though. It's called like In the Heart of the Sea or something like that.
And Ron Howard's directing it, who's a really good director, so that's promising.
And it's got Thor.
Yeah, Chris Hemsworth. Between him doing that and then the Michael Mann movie, I keep forgetting the name of the Michael Mann movie. We got in the trailer quite a few times.
Oh, Black Hat?
Yes, Black Hat. And we got Unbroken again. We've gotten that trailer a few times now. And then, so then we got Taken 3. Now, I've seen that trailer quite a few times now. Is that the first time you've seen that trailer?
That's the first time I've seen it.
Okay, so if you haven't seen the trailer, it's Taken 3. But, the famous line from the first Taken is when Liam Neeson goes into that big speech about how I will find you, I will kill you, and then the bad guy says, good luck. So in the trailer, Forrest Whitaker, who is like the police guy going after him, he basically says like, over the phone, like, if you go all the way with this, I will not be able to, help you. The CIA, the FBI, and the PD are going to be after you. And then Liam Neeson, of course, just goes, good luck. And what was funny is...
So is that going to end the same way for Neeson as the bad guys from the first one ended up?
I don't know. So, yeah, exactly. So, I already knew he was going to say that because I've gotten the trailer a couple times. There was a guy in front of us in the theater. I kid you not. The moment Liam Neeson said that, the guy went like, what? And he like stood up and he like
walked around.
He walked around. Like he literally looked like he was about to walk out of the theater. And he like had his arms up and then he kind of like stopped and then turned back and then walked back to his seat. It was kind of hilarious. But do we get any other trailers?
Yeah, we got a few, but they were all ones that we'd seen before.
Yeah. So,
we didn't get an interview trailer, so that was amazing.
Or Into the Woods.
Or Into the Woods, yeah.
Or Dracula Untold.
Or The Hobbit, surprisingly.
Yeah, that's true. That's next week. So, well, there we go. So thanks for watching. Next week is The Hobbit, and we'll go from there. So, thanks for watching.